5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Look here. It is still my intention in the next few nights to try and give some of you the opportunity to get yourself out of the 20th century. It just seemed like an appropriate time since it was the end of this year, so I heard. I am still, although I know I'm not specifying it, but I'm still trying to lay the groundwork for some of you. Part of last time we were taping, and tonight, and maybe a night or two more. It's generally my plan to, if I get near a typewriter, some nights I'll actually write out the story rather than just do it here on the spot. But it's going to be new. It's going to be more compact. It is going to be more complex and expansive. And in other ways I'm not going to specify, that some of you may be able to hear, covering what's heretofore always been referred to as creation stories. Got nothing to do with religion, of course. Got nothing to do with your grandfather's ideas of mythical gods, but it is getting closer to the physical reality of creation being a continuing... That's enough. Here we go. As part of the preface and the groundwork, I was going to say that all of you need to, if you're going to try and get the most out of this, you need to be involved with the great pseudo method of thinking more than you have to about something specifically, and that is words. That words are nothing less than absolute leading level energy. That's it. And it is a most delicate, to say the least, surgery to try and dissect and examine words using words. That's not just funny or clever. It is surgery that's almost impossible, because you cannot take one word and stick it between the letters of another word. There's nowhere to cut. You try to cut, and the word that you're using as a scalpel comes apart. It's very delicate. The only way that you can approach it that I care to try to describe is through the same kind of method that I was talking about regarding almost anything in life. Anything. And that's thinking more about it than you have to, because normal thought about words, no matter what you think and no matter what courses you may have had regarding linguistics, rhetoric, English, Spanish, whatever, it's got nothing to do with this. Because more information, more education along any lines like that will not get close to the groundwork that I am trying to point towards regarding words. Words are simply, or one simple way to put it, are made to stimulate, to motivate. Now, ordinary intelligence surely would agree to that, most ordinary people, but then it would try and find exceptions. If I made it as an absolute dogmatic statement that that's it, then ordinary intelligence, as always it should do, would try and find some exception. For the sake of getting some of you running, if you care to, you could look upon words serving a kind of subtle tripartite purpose. That words are either made to excite, stimulate, or to calm and reassure, which is the second. And the third would be, or to impart information for later stimulation, for later action. If that gets any of you going, the reason I bring up some of that, since I already pointed out that some people's intellect could already be looking for an exception, so the place where that your ordinary intelligence might say, well, wait a minute, there's a hole in that. There's a good place to start, is why I went ahead and joined in with you. And so, all right, you can say, well, it should have 3 descriptions, so there they are. Okay? It's the same thing, though. Just 3 different dresses that you put on the same little Mountie, the same little lumberjack. It's all still energy. It just would appear at the kind of seriatim running of ordinary intelligence that, for instance, calming is not stimulation. But if I got to stop here for a minute, you guys have got to be getting this sharp. To use 2 extremes out of 3 sub-dressings I gave you to say that words are used, either you could look at as being the attempt to excite or to calm, you do see, surely by now, that calming is a form of stimulation. And if that sounds too linearly as two trains on a one-way single track, then instead of calming, consider reassuring. But still, after all of that, if ordinary people, if I had some ordinary intelligence and I was insisting this had some great import, ordinary intelligence would still say, well, that doesn't cover it. There is much more, and they'd begin to want to talk about words almost in the same way that men want to talk about personality, about computers, that, well, there's much more. There's much more you certainly hadn't covered. That's not all words are. And if I gave them a few seconds, let's see if I can play any further with ordinary intelligence, it would come up with ideas of artistic implications, poetic connotations of words, all sorts of things, spiritual shadings, even the attempt to use words to convey that which is actually inexpressible. Words are no less, if you were any more common, I'd say no more or no less, but they're no less than energy itself. You are caught at the ordinary general level of non-specific use of the intellect to believe, to just go ahead blindly to believe because there's no basis for it, other than the flawed basis, other than a basis of 3/5 of ordinarily available consciousness, to believe that there's anything more to energy, there's any more to words, or any more purpose to words than to convey energy, or specifically to stimulate, to activate the intelligence. That's it. Into the questions as to what kind. Why are some words fighting words according to the Anglo-Saxon law? Why are some words even forbidden in many parts of the world? Seems to vary from culture to culture. Why are some words treated as being sacred? Ordinary intelligence would say that they have various shadings of importance, that there are diverse purposes to words. And it's not as simple as I put it. And it's absolutely simple as I put it. It is a form of energy itself. That is the beginning of it. That is the end of it. If words were not for the purpose of stimulation, either now or eventually, then you would not have definitions. Words would have no definition if it was not for the point specifically to stimulate. If that were not so, here is what humans would have. You would have fixed, still have fixed animal sounds and signals. If you take the imperfect, yet worthwhile, if you know how to do it, comparison again. Let's say between man on this planet and the next highest mammals, creatures that seem to be closest. They are driven by communications. They're driven in the area of communications by fixed sounds, grunts, squeaks, chirps, whatever they are, or even physical signals of wolves and other animals taking submissive positions and dropping their ears and doing the tail and all the things that any second-year zoology major knows about. One aspect of man being charged with being non-submissive is specifically in the fact of him having mutable speech. Not just mutable in some sense that ordinary intelligence would say, well, yes, it's good that language can grow and expand, etc. Let me make it to you even in a more surprising way if you can hear it. Part of the charge, part of the purpose, part of the ammunition that man has to live non-submissively, vis-a-vis what I was pointing out last time we were taping of ordinary creatures here, one of the distinguishing factors being that they submit from everything to discomfort, to maltreatment, to death itself, whereas man is wired and primed not to submit, even to the inevitable. And he doesn't have to be a hero, and he doesn't have to know anything about pagan, Germanic, fatalistic myths. If he is just ordinary, he is going to struggle to not submit. Part of this non-submission is not simply in that description of me saying that language is mutable. here's the part I was hoping some of you would find surprising enough that you can, once you see what your nervous system does with it when I say it, you can say to your nervous system, take that, you old nervous system, you. That is, that part of the ammunition, part of the expansive purpose of the mutability of human language is this, is that it is subject to varying interpretations. For instance, again, in this artificial, imperfect, but yet telling, if you know how to listen, comparisons, gorillas, tigers, wolves, do not mistake their words, their language. If one of them does, if there's such a thing, then he is certainly, or she would be, a prime example of a psychotic human. And in this case, you'd have a psychotic wolf, an absolute mutant, so don't get hung up with that, as you should know, but I'll go ahead and do it. Wolves, tigers, any other creature, any other sentient creature on this level, a wolf does not make a noise or a signal and another wolf go, did he mean so and so? A female tiger does not show by either sound or scent or signal, does not show, hey, big boy, what you doing? And a tiger go, boy, I wish I could find some female companionship, and she's standing right there. It is fixed. It is fixed. There is no mistaking, there is no miscommunication when you're dealing with a fixed language. Seems obvious enough. Then, ordinary intelligence would almost want to say, well, yes, that's good, and that's what we're striving for with humans. That's why the language grows, and etc. Wrong. You should not be surprised, but anything that obvious has got to be incorrect. Part of the unique purpose, part of the motivating fuel of human language is that it is open to various interpretations, and I'll go ahead and say it, what is normally referred to as miscommunication. But to call it miscommunication, you've got to be just as ordinary as white bread, cheap white bread. Because what seems to be miscommunication is not miscommunication. It is varying interpretations. Now back to what some of you laughed at in this subparagraph when I started, were it not for the fact that words are simply energy and they are made specifically to stimulate, to motivate people. If that were not true, words would have no definition. Now with ordinary intelligence, now that I've taken a few minutes running that way, now some of you who laughed, I noticed none of you laughed this time, like, well, I thought I got something, but now it makes no sense. If words did not have definitions, you couldn't have various interpretations. If words didn't have definitions, you couldn't misuse them. If words didn't have definitions, you could not engage in miscommunication. Right? Well, yeah, but so what? Well, so what? If that were not true, we'd be dealing with fixed, unchangeable signals and sounds, and you would not be human. And yet all you got to do, if you can jump sideways or even spatially backwards just a second before what I said, ordinary intelligence would say, well, that is absolutely insane. Because the sign of being human is that we can communicate and not misunderstand each other. That's why we have a dictionary. That's why certain groups of people, tribes, nationalities have their own language so that we can agree that, by God, that's a hand, that's a cup. No, no, no. No, to be human, there's got to be the possibility, always excellent possibility, that up can be down. And then ordinary intelligence can say, well, it can't be. Well, maybe not it can't be, but somebody can say it is. Well, yeah, but they'd be wrong. Oh, really? Well, maybe I just misunderstood them. Maybe when they said, well, that was up, I thought it said down. Maybe. If words were literally, if they per se, within themselves, intrinsically, endogenous, indigenously, if each and every word, each little word, whatever it was, if that word meant what the dictionary says it meant, and that's the purpose of the word, is to convey information, Not this crude, obviously misdirected scenario I'm drawing of it just being no more than energy. A word means something. If it didn't, we would just be animals, right? We'd just grunt and go, well, cheep, make some kind of signal. But we're human, and therefore words, in fact, the more literate, the more sophisticated you are, words mean something specifically. Very specifically, and that's the whole point. Well, other than this fact, that's not the point at all. But you're right, that is the point. If you're ordinary, if you're not going to see that words are made to stimulate people, to set the nervous system on fire, in the case of spoken words, through sound waves. Anything else that you want to talk about words, you're down to the subcarrier level. You're down dealing at a secondary intellectual activity. You're down in the basement. You're not involved with any kind of real thinking. But consider, I mentioned fighting words. If you people don't know, there's been running, at least throughout the Anglo-Saxon world, for hundreds of years in the law. It changes a little bit here and there, but even on the basis of free speech, as they call it, they're considered to be certain fighting words. In our society, they don't really talk like this on our great cable stations that I hear are still getting some of these. But there's a term that, in our society, it has two words. And like if you had a little kid, and a little kid, after it was a year or so old, one day if it says mother, you might say, well, it said half a word, half a term. Whatever, there's a term. All right, the initials are MF. And there are others. But in our society, there are jurisdictions, and there have been cases, this is real quick, this is not the point, but that take exception. They're known as fighting words. That is, if one person calls another one a certain term, a certain name, and this other guy turns around and punches somebody, he will not necessarily be guilty of a battery. There are certain jurisdictions, there have been times in our country and other countries, they go, well, and they get real sticky. Because, and I'm going to get to it, it got nothing to do with the law, it's got nothing to do with judges and the judicial system, it has to do with life, not sure what to do about this yet. But there are circumstances where in certain jurisdictions, that is, in certain areas of last body, that somebody somewhere, it appears to be a judge, or it appears to be a state legislature or something, they say, wait a minute, we got freedom of speech and you can say almost anything you want to. But now, any reasonable man, then they start descriptions like this, any reasonable man under our times and our conditions knows that if he calls another person an MF or a certain term, that there's every likelihood that he's probably trying to provoke, stimulate the other person into mayhem, into a fight. So we're going to say that you can't say that. And it is not in contradiction to freedom of speech. It's just those are fighting words, and you should not say them. If you do say them to somebody, if you call somebody that, and they punch you in the nose, don't come to this court and say, he punched me in the nose. You know, don't. You know, you should have known better. All right. This is not a lesson in American jurisprudence, because this is not even true all over even our country. But I was trying to show you that there is this running awareness that comes and goes throughout the world, that even a little tribe somewhere, a little group of people, and they say, well, we've got no particular stringent economic system, we have no conflicting political parties, and so people should be able to say what they want to. But even they will get around to, no, wait a minute, let's don't call each other certain names. Then they might say, and plus, let's do not make insulting remarks. Some of us are still living by the myths of some of the gods that our forefathers believed in, some of the stories, and I know some of you younger people don't have much interest in it, but let's do this. Do not be laughing or ridiculing the old people's gods and their myths. Because they might not punch you in the nose, or they might not have the strength to, but they could be real upset. So they start picking out words, and they say, don't say them. And they're getting close, not just on the basis, well, it's obscene, or not just on the basis that it is blasphemous. It even comes very close Nobody really recognizes, but it just comes close to them saying that this is almost the same as you punching somebody in the nose, except it's a sound. And if it's ordinary intelligence, then they get very bogged down into trying to, in some way, verbalize either a support or an attack of either protecting or trying to prohibit fighting words. That is, they won't say, well, wait a minute. These are nothing but sounds. If a guy wants to call somebody else a zither brain, and in our society, that just sends many people just into blind rages. And we all know that, or most people do. You shouldn't do that. And then part of life's body, that is perhaps another court and another jurisdiction, goes, well, wait a minute. Maybe I wouldn't like to be called a zither brain, but this is the 20th century. We live in a free society. Now, if somebody wants to say that, it is not. What if even some group says, well, because of this obscure group, or maybe it was a common group that used to worship the zither as a sacred icon, that this is blasphemous. Let's just throw that in. Then a jurisdiction somewhere, that is another part of life's body somewhere, will say that may be so-called blasphemous to some groups of people, but a word, if we're talking about that it's going to blaspheme, offend the zither god, then I got to say, what kind of God is that if he can't take some little human somewhere attacking him? Therefore, this court is not going to support any legal theory that some word in and of itself is blasphemous, that it in some way is sacrilegious, it is some way emotionally or spiritually unacceptable. That's not the purpose of a court or society. You people are going to have to work that out amongst yourselves, because the word itself, you can't offend the God. Some word is not going to damn society. But see, they're skirting away from the actual fact that words are energy. And there's somebody calls another person a zither brain and does it in an aggressive manner under the conditions of a place where zither brain is a fighting word, a term. Then the person has sent out sound waves, has sent out energy, and the purpose was either to frighten or to bring about a knifing. That is, to frighten the other person, to turn around to them and say, well, you zither brain, and have the person go, ooh, and recoil and realize, hey, I better get away. It's either that or it is to provoke overt hostility, and they may get into a fighting or a knifing. Ordinary thinking about words can skate. I haven't said anything now that surely has not been put in some form amongst ordinary people. And some of it I even related to you from the great wonderful world of the judiciary in our part of the world. But they cannot decide one way or the other on this issue, as many other things, of course. And it's not the fault of the judiciary, because I remind you, I am talking about the kinds of certain activities going on in life's body as manifested in man, and here is one of them, is they cannot decide, are there such things as fighting words? Is there some instance where a word itself or a term is of such ignominy that we just got to disallow it? And then the majority of life's body in man goes, nah, that can't be. And so they'll say it can't be. And then a little later something will happen. Some civilized man, some college professor, something will happen, and it's like it jogs life, and a few months or years later, somebody somewhere, that is in other parts of life's body, will go, wait, we got to reconsider this. Because those people knew, the person that said that knew that the other person was either going to be heartbroken or was probably going to be so mad that they're going to try to take a shot at him. Now, wait a minute. But then they're caught up with this, not the individuals. This part of life's intelligence through man gets down to words are not that much, or words are more than that. They simply cannot see what I said, that words are no more than energy itself. And the purpose of words is to convey energy. Even when it seems to be, if it's trying to convey reassurance, or let me soothe you, don't be so upset. Words are taken to be all sorts of things. Look, even when I'm here talking, it seems to be, and you do it too, that words even seem to deserve, to demand gestures, inflections of your voice. Did you say you're talking about something little? You're talking about something very expansive. You're talking about whether people get angry and you do facial expressions. Unless you're just going to stand here and deliver this as Clint Eastwood. When did I see Clint Eastwood take one of Jimmy Swaggart's sermons and try to deliver it? I know I wouldn't, but I'm just trying to get you to see, because there is no easy door. There's no blatant one example or any group of examples for me to try and get you to see what I'm talking about how delicate, to say the least. It's almost a non-existent surgery for words to operate on words. It's just that ordinary intelligence, this is part of it. Words are part of it. You couldn't be ordinarily intelligent without words. It's just to say that words are nothing but absolute transfers of energy, no different than putting gas in an automobile, in an internal combustion engine. It's no less than sending water across a mill wheel. Ordinary intelligence just dismisses that. It can say, well, I hear what you're saying. And it wouldn't even bother to try and argue. To say, well, wait a minute, I can think of examples where it's not even wired up to want to do that. It just dismisses it. The words are much more than that. Because you're very close to telling people that there's not much to you intellectually. No offense. Or do you personally, what you think of as being your individuality, it's not all that much of a thing. Ordinary personalities, ordinary people's intelligence cannot hear that. No matter how you tell them, even if they didn't get insulted, they go, well, I don't know why you said that. It's not true. Because I'm so complex. I've lived with me 30 or 40 years now, and that's all I can do, make head nor tail of me. So don't tell me I'm not complex. To say that this is all words are, ordinary intelligence it's just noise. Well, like words being prohibited, how about also, just for a second, words, again, they're skating along the edge, but it's not necessarily now in the world of the judiciary, but of words having some positive inherent characteristics, to wit, prayers, certain names of gods, certain retelling of ritualistic myths. They are taken by many people, educated people, as they're supposed to, that the word itself has power within itself. To call out the name of your God, whatever religion it was, or to call out the name of some saint or some prophet, or in certain of the so-called religions that are a little less westernized, can be a chant of some kind, a mantra, that there's a word that I say it that is so sacred I wouldn't tell anybody else, or I can only say it under certain conditions. I can only say it when I'm with other people that agree with me. That the word itself has some power. A lot of you are laughing. You simply do understand that the world has been filled with, and is still filled with, the power of that kind of myth, that kind of thinking. That it is true. There are people who would say, listen, I'm generally an atheist. And yet you usually find out that there's probably one or two words that they don't want to say, not in a casual manner. Or if they do, if you could get inside their own nervous system, as the way life is arranged, if they do take the Lord's name in vain, their God's name in vain, after 40 years of being non-religious, they still go, uh-oh, and they maybe have some kind of little something they do that goes like, well, hey, God, I didn't mean it, just in case you are there. I'm sorry I did it. The belief that the word itself, the name of God is normally one of the great ones, is, you don't casually throw that around. You don't use it as some kind of expletive. That the word has some sort of power. But then if I tried to say to those same people, which would constitute most of humanity, to say the least, if I said, well, all right, listen to what you're saying. All you're saying is that words, some way, are energy. Then they go, no, wait a minute. They might say, well, it has some kind of power. And I say, it doesn't have power, it is power. That is, it is energy. I don't mean that word has any more power than something else. Gasoline's gasoline. It could be 89 octane or 91 octane, but if you think there's any difference, you're hard up for a hobby. Ordinary intelligence cannot fathom even what it would say that some of these words, like in a negative sense, that some fighting words, some insults, have such power that we shouldn't say them. But then at the apparent other end, there are some words that are so sacred, that are so unearthly, they're so transhuman, that you can't just casually say them. And certainly don't use them as some sort of verbal club as a curse. You just do not do it. And if I say, well, listen, don't you hear what you're saying? If I was that silly, they wouldn't hear it. They'll go, well, yeah, you're saying it has some particular power. And I go, yeah, come on. They'll say, yeah, but the reason it has power. And then they get specific. They say, it's because what we're discussing here is the name of the God of this religion. That is my religion, or the religion that's prevailing here. See, and then they've missed it. They took the first story. That the power is in the name itself. That is the threat, or that is the promise. And it's not. The threat, the promise, is simply in its ability to stimulate, to create locomotion in the nervous system. It doesn't have to make somebody fight to call them a zither brain, but it makes their nervous system. Perhaps they're wired and primed up to be John Q. Milquetoast, Mr. Timid. And you call them a zither brain, and inside they're just having little fits. But they're afraid to even show it, whatever reason, apparent. It doesn't mean that they physically must show some reaction to it when I say stimulate, because here's what we're talking about. If it was just simply physical reaction, we'd be back to fixed language amongst animals. It is not necessarily that action, overt action, is caused at the time. The nervous system, that is the brain. It's the brain that hears words, you know that, don't you? It's not your elbow. It's not even your limbic system to start with. It is your brain that hears it. And if it hears it and takes any account of it, it has been stimulated, whether you move a muscle or not. It's somebody calls you a zither brain, and you cut your eyes around, the guy's pointing, yeah, you. And you decide this is not the time to challenge that guy. You know, he's with 14 bikers that seem to be his buddies. You don't like being called a zither brain, and your brain knows you don't. And your brain immediately registers that it does not like being called a zither brain. It is stimulated. You may stand motionless. Like, well, maybe they will finally think I didn't even hear them. But you were stimulated. Well, between those examples of fighting words and prayers, maybe I can throw in another one for a second, if any of you need anything else. I guess you're aware of the fact that in these glorious days of mergers and wonderful world of business, that millions of dollars very often are paid, one company by another, for the brand name. Not the product. They may get the product, but that's not why they bought the damn company. They bought it to get the brand name. Now, you all know that, don't you? You just never thought about it in a certain way. That some big conglomerate, General Foods, does not turn around and buy Burgerdoodle Corporation because they know of some way to make hamburgers or french fries that nobody else does. They buy it for one reason. They may pay $100 million to buy the whole chain of Burgerdoodle restaurants for one reason. The name. Not the product, the name. Now, up until now, I'd have people here on Wall Street and everybody going, well, yeah, so what? Think about it. They didn't buy a product. They bought the stimuli that will happen at the sound of hearing, quote, Burgerdoodle. They paid $100 million for the general, the area where it exists, the chain. They bought not the product. They got the buildings. They got all the food and stuff in the inventory. That wasn't the point, though. They could have gotten that anywhere. They probably already had one. They bought it because of the general stimuli that will happen in people's brain when they hear the words Burgerdoodle. $100 million for the number of people that will be stimulated in a certain way to hear that word, that term. It is energy. It is stimulation. That is the end of it. That is the three-dimensional extent of words. Again, from a certain view, some of you who may be following it, it could be described from ordinary views that is so crude, that is so simplistic, that it's not even worthy of a sophisticated man's or woman's real consideration. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I could have said that when I was 12 years old. That's not saying anything. Right. Another aspect, when I was a few nights back, was even using general area of some myths as a springboard, and since I'm now promising to produce my own, just for you, new creation myth, when I was using those examples in a slightly altered way, I was pointing out that although at that time I was pointing out that myths are not cultural, they're not religious, they're not even a denoting of the subconscious psychology of some group somewhere. And that's the way they're normally analyzed, and that's just an academic hobby at the secondary level, but that's not what they are. The words and all of the myths everywhere are made to stimulate men to certain thoughts or to certain actions. That is the power of myths. And recall, I'm using myths in the widest sense of the word, stuff that your family, your genetic line may have called a certain religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, of stories that quite ordinary people may take as being factual, of some prophet or some god somewhere that took human form, is actually killed, lays there, and then he gets up and he's alive and he says, "Ha-ha!" And people say, "That happened. That is part of my religion." It is still a myth, but it has power. Now, if I was so foolish to get in a conversation or a debate with an ordinary person, they would say, well, now the power of this resurrection story, the power is in its supernatural message, that if you follow this particular religion, you can die, like you're going to have to, just like he did or she did, but they arose and said, "Aha!" and they started the new Burgadoodle religion. And if you pursue that, when you die, you too, after a few days, can stand up and go, "Aha!" They would say that that's the power, that the power is supernatural. All right, the power is transcendental, okay? They're getting close. The power, what they can't say, what ordinary intelligence can't say, that the power is not in the story, because it's a myth. And I don't mean it's true or false, it's a myth. The power is not in the story that this guy was slaughtered and got back up out of the grave. The power is in the stimulation that happens in your brain when you hear that story. But ordinary intelligence can't separate the two any more than ordinary intelligence can separate a sentence and tell that there is a difference between nouns and verbs. Oh, yes, I can. No, you can't. The power is in the stimulation that will hit the brain, and it is not the same thing. It is not the same thing as what seems to be the story. I told you it is delicate surgery. You can forget microscopic on your knees and other tricky parts. An ordinary person, and all of you, let's assume, grew up around some religion. Let's just say Christianity, make it an easy one. The story, the heart of Christianity, according to some reports, the way they tell it, is the resurrection, which is the heart of all the religions, but they really identify because the story of Jesus killed a man and he arose from the dead, and now they say that's the whole point. If you follow this religion, you too will rise from the dead. There is no way to talk to ordinary intelligence, yours or anyone else, and say, well, look, that story, forget whether it's true or false, the story is just useless. I mean, if the story is true, who cares? And all reasonable intelligence on this planet will go, I do. You know, I'm not even a Christian and I care. I'm glad to know it's around in case I want to convert right before I find I'm going to die. They say the story is mucho important. What could be more important? It's a way out of death. And then if I had to say, all right, I'll give you that, but that's not the point of the story. Do you see? We have reached the point that there is no way to expand ordinary intelligence in any way that it will ever see anything new, because it will say, well, it is the point. And I can say, all right, it seems to be the point. Well, it is the point. It's not the point. The point was to convey stimulation. Well, all right, because that does stimulate me. It makes me want to continue to be a Christian. It makes me want to consider maybe checking into the religion, especially since I've been spitting up blood pretty regularly lately. And then if I try to say, no, that's still not it. And the ordinary intelligence have to say, well, what the hell is it then? It's the stimulation. And ordinary intelligence say, well, I heard that, and it does stimulate me. I'm glad to be a Christian. Yeah, but being a Christian is not the point. Do you see? There's nowhere to go with that ordinary intelligence. And if that's all you're listening with, then I'm boring you also, because you go, well, you're saying it's the point and it's not the point. The story doesn't matter. They're all myths. All stories. All words are myths. You only got two choices. They're fixed, unchangeable grunts that are not capable of misinterpretation between any two reasonable specimens of the same species, whether we were talking about that we were warthogs, aardvarks, or humans. You either got that, or you've got where language is changeable and seems to change in the same way ordinary people would say the way society, civilization, culture changes. What it is how humanity has changed. What it is the needs of life have changed, and therefore talk, individual words change. But the only reason they change is they're supposed to be unchangeable. The only reason that they can change is because they have distinct definitions. Okay. The only reason that they have power is that the particular definition is irrelevant. And then ordinary people say, well, it's not to me. And I'd have to say, well, yeah, you're right. It's not supposed to be. Well, you mean if somebody called me a zither brain, you mean if I just looked at it as being a sound? Let's say that you had some musical ability, if any of you, and for some reason you have this fanatical hatred of augmented chords. I don't know why. Well, let's be specific. A G flat augmented. And I said, all right, that's just a sound. And you went, yeah, it is, and I don't know why, but I can hear a G flat augmented, and I can spot it. And it sends me into a rage. I mean, I want to get my hands on whoever played it, on whatever instrument. And if I say, well, that's the same thing as being called a zither brain. No, because I hear zither brain and I think something. All right, let me see if I can help a little. I know how absolute tricky, because I point out that the surgery, to say it's delicate, it's almost beyond any definition of delicate. Let me try it again right quick. Some of this may hit some of you. I'll just shoot them as I ride by. Think about, instead of religions and myths and matters of life and death, listen to me. In the general areas of the things that seem to occupy men, other than the primaries, other than food, shelter, and procreation enough to keep the races going. If it gets into the areas I know referred to as hobbies, were it not for words, there'd be no hobbies. There would be no secondary activity. You could not collect stamps without the stimuli of words. You could not play with model trains. Bird watching. It's always good to try and help and to lead people even further astray. All right. Stamp collecting. It appears to be a whole scenario of going through, there's all sorts of ramifications of which I'm sure I'm unaware. But of keeping up with stamps, trying to collect all the stamps from Albania, all 3 of them, or whatever. Trying to collect all the stamps from 1 century, 1 year, 1 part of the world. But think, And any hobby, any secondary activity on this planet that was not specifically physical, such as sports, exercise, just something that seemed to be just physically, or obviously was physically demanding. Any other hobby could not exist. No one could collect stamps if they could not sit and look at the stamp, look at a catalog about stamps, or just look off by themselves and think about stamp, and what they think stimulates the brain, their brain. And they take that as being serious, that my interest is in stamps. And so when I think about stamps, or I read this article, and it says such and such stamp that they thought no more existed, one is reputedly found in Singapore in the hands of a dealer. And the guy says, and you're saying, then you want, maybe you're not interested, but you're not a smart ass with him, and you go, well, what is it? And he says, it's this stamp, and no one has seen one in 20 years. We thought they were all gone. I've got a picture of one that somebody drew, the last person that saw one, and the person begins to describe it to you in the colors. Do you hear me? We're not talking about that stamp. We're not talking about stamp collecting. Stamp collecting is a myth. All hobbies are myths. What he is talking about, the only thing that's happening is the words. Now I have to go through all the words. I have to name the stamp, but just the headlines. It says, 1912 purple Aruba stamp reportedly found in Singapore. The words, 1912, maybe the whole term. He's wired up. He just looked at the whole 1912 purple Aruba. And it hits him, and this is the same as putting cocaine. It's not any different than cocaine going directly to the brain. Or if you could take a hypodermic and stick it up someone's nose and shoot alcohol directly into the brain. Grind up a Valium and rub it right in. There is no difference if you can think beyond what you have to. If you can begin to slip up, and I hope meet me somewhere close to my myth, the new creation myth, when it gets to it, there is no operational difference between cocaine, alcohol getting to the brain, or, I don't mean just in what appears to be negative sense, the final nutritional value from zucchini. All of you know, you should know by now, that what you eat can seem to affect how you think at some particular time. And no, I don't mean anything mystical, just overeating, eating too much of something, eating something that your system doesn't particularly care for. All the way from that to actual drugs, alcohol, into the brain, as they call it in the ordinary world, alters one's consciousness, is the way they put it. All right? 1912 purple Aruba altered the guy's consciousness. There is no difference. Don't make me laugh. I mean, that's silly. To say reading about a stamp that you're interested in is no different. I mean, your enjoyment about reading that. Even if you never see it, just enjoyment. It's just a hobby, yeah. To say that there's no difference between that and smoking crack, drinking, yeah, that's silly. Yeah, I guess you're right. Oh, why should I lie to you? It's not silly. Were it not for words, there would be no such thing as secondary activities. Those of you who can recall what I described in the past, that again, for an artificial, arbitrary, but a worthwhile, temporary description and a division into primary activities and secondary activities, and that now at the general level, secondary activities are as necessary as primary. That it is now necessary, believe it or not, as necessary here and there, for there to be apparent fanatical stamp collectors as there are in general, the people fanatically are interested in having enough to eat so that they don't die. And many people fanatically interested in doing it. That's medical talk for having sex. For you people out of town. For getting in out of the rain. For getting in when the temperature drops below either 32 degrees or 70, according to how sensitive and how intelligent you are. I look at you. But it is now to the point, it's of no consequence, specifically what it is, but since I made up the example, that stamp collecting is it now, in a certain way, as important as it is to humanity for people to eat, for people to engage in sex, to keep the race going, that now stamp collecting, as foreign, as ridiculous, as silly as you may find it to be ordinarily, it is now, that kind of secondary activity is as important in a certain way as sex is. But there could be no secondary activities whatsoever, none, without words. There could be no hobbies, no art, there could be nothing but sex, eating, and getting out of the inclement weather. That's all we'd be doing. That's all ordinary creatures would be doing, and any sound, that is, any language you apparently had, would be fixed. It would have to be fixed. That is indicative of creatures wired and made to and prepared to submit. You have got to have a fixed language. That words are what they seem to be, even though they'd be a grunt or a chirp. When you get into man, you have got part of the indicative nature of him not submitting is that apparently he can talk about things he doesn't know what he's talking about. He can apparently call this down. Or that he can say this is down and somebody said, did he say frown? And get real mad about it. That is a sign. That is a characteristic of non-submission. See if I can squeeze in a little bit more. There's another aspect. That part of life's body via man roundly, continually, parts of it condemn imagination. In a particular sense. To tell somebody, what? You said, and you hear what they say and you say, hey, that's your imagination. Your imagination. Under the proper conditions, circumstances, that is almost a bulletproof condemnation of somebody. I mean, a Nobel Prize winner, then a guy that's just been a Nobel nominee can turn to the big cheese when he says something, some new theory, some idea he has. To be accused of somebody that seems to be almost equally as intelligent as the accusee, to say, I can't believe you said that. I mean, if you believe that, I got to tell you this, that's nothing but your imagination. Now, under civilized, more complex, general 3D levels, where words are more and more important, if you never thought about it, that is almost intellectually a mortal blow to tell somebody, when it gets down especially to their final magnum opus of their philosophy, some idea they have, and to hear it and say, would you repeat that? Or they write a big book, 700 or 800 pages, with one theme, one idea, and you say, yeah, I tried to read it, I read most of it, I thought about it, and you're obviously literate, you have a way with words, but, I mean, the thesis of what you said is your imagination. That is almost crippling. What is going on under those conditions that to accuse something of being somebody's imagination? We hadn't changed the subject. I'm just having to talk faster. Part of the condemnation, the basis of part of life's body attacking other parts for things that the words it uses by saying, hey, that's your imagination. A part of the description that I was going to try and give you in words is the condemnation is generally based upon this, that you seem to have words capable of passing along energy, stimuli that is, that apparently have no visible source, have no material counterpart. The person, apparently another human, just says this. And it's presented almost mythically. That is, it does not offer any proof, it just makes a statement. But it seems to be coming from some part of life's body, that is, some other individual that seems to be reasonable, maybe even have a reputation. They're just otherwise, they seem to be sane, and they say this thing that belies everything you know about that one area. All right, now forget individuals. It's like life having one part of it say something, and another part says your imagination, and dismiss it as your imagination, because in sense what they're saying, that part of the last body, is this comment, this piece of energy, these words, there is no visible, I see no source for this. There is no way. I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I can't even theorize any kind of actual basis for this. I mean, there is no basis. It's your imagination. And not only will it condemn it and dismiss it, but it can, as you should know, turn out wars, great conflicts. And what I'm trying to get you to see is the basis that it's almost part of last body saying, this is your imagination, and there is no material basis for saying this, and yet, if you continue to say that, it's going to cause people to be stimulated. And part of last body goes, wait, no. Wait a minute, that's just their imagination. I suggest to you this. Well, I guess I should be happy at the kind of laughing reaction just then, but I was going to say that this kind of dynamic having to do with imagination I just described is not unlike a certain view that life has toward atomic energy, or even the world of subatomic particles, them looking at it in this. Of course, it seems to come out in scientists and philosophers, but it's almost as though life looks at that kind of area as being both cogent, potentially powerful, and yet simultaneously frightening. And the fright, I know they say things about great nuclear winters and destroying the world. I suggest to you there's more behind the words. The energy of this kind of ambivalent feeling toward even the world apparently of hard, strict science into the subatomic areas, wherein reality seems to always be verging on holding great potential promise, such as we ever come up with fusion, energy, controllable, but at the same time, this may kill us all. It's almost as though life is then looking at what it calls through man imagination in that same kind of way, that this holds great promise. This is a kind of energy that doesn't seem to have any kind of basis. Somebody just says, well, my theory is such and such. My theory is that we're all being driven by secret waves coming from Neptune. And part of last body says, wait a minute, there's no basis for that, none whatsoever. But the part of why it says that very often knows if you go around saying that, you're going to end up probably with a cult following, or there'll be a whole bunch of people going, I knew it, tell me more. And it's like this is almost simultaneously open to great use that's going to produce almost free energy, like cold fusion. Remember that little episode? Just great amounts of energy from nothing. And yet it's also frightening, like this whole thing is too unpredictable. I'm not sure even I can control it. And so it comes out with imagination, as it makes humans call it, and then simultaneously right across the street while playing puppet, while treating us all to a Punch and Judy show of which we're all Punch and we're all Judy, and it says, well, I believe so-and-so. And then on the other hand it goes, you got to be kidding. I mean, that's your imagination. And part of what it's saying is, Jesus, there is energy apparently with no basis, no source to it, and it would work. There's every chance in the world this would work. You shouldn't do that. That's just your imagination. Forget about it. We're out of time. So we'll press on with my threats of the story coming up. We're absolutely out of tapes. Okay.